Before her name was softened by foreign tongues, she ruled the Nile and the sky. And when her voice fell silent, the world forgot who gave it life. The Nile sleeps under a black horizon. The air does not move. Only the reflection of stars trembles across the surface, as if the heavens themselves remember what humanity does not. In the distance, a single lotus rises through the current. It opens slowly, as if obeying a memory older than the gods that would later claim its symbol. Across the ancient stone of Kemet, the hieroglyphs still glow faintly when the light changes. Each mark carved with precision, a language not written for men, but for eternity. Among them, one sign repeats, the throne, Aset, she of the throne, long before Greece, before Rome, before Egypt was called Egypt, her name carried weight in the mouth. Not a title, not a myth, a vibration said to shape the world itself. But when empires came, her sound was broken, translated, rewritten. What was once the name of creation became the name of a goddess tamed by language. The Nile remembers, the temples of Dendera and Abydos still whisper her true name beneath centuries of dust. Her story did not vanish, it was translated, reshaped to fit a new tongue, a new empire, a new faith. Tonight, the name speaks again, not as myth, but as record. Not in worship, but in remembrance. Aset, before the Greeks called her Isis, before the Romans made her divine mother, before the priests of another age sealed her within new scriptures, she was the voice of the Nile, the throne upon which every pharaoh sat, the mother of resurrection, the keeper of the true name. The silence ends here. The world remembers her as Isis, a gentle mother, a loving queen. But the walls of Dendera whisper a name older than empire, Aset, she of the throne. The official story begins not in Egypt, but in Greece. When Alexander crossed into Kemet in 332 BCE, he did not only bring soldiers, he brought translators, scholars, scribes, and with them came the beginning of a slow and deliberate rewriting. On the island of Philae, Greek inscriptions begin to appear beside the ancient hieroglyphs. They call her Isis Pantengenithleia, Isis, mother of all, a goddess of the sea, a bringer of fertility, a protector of sailors and kings. To the Hellenistic world, she became a symbol of universal motherhood, gentle, compassionate, merciful. Her temples rose not only along the Nile, but in Athens, in Rome, and even in distant Gaul. Statues of a seated woman holding her child began to replace the carved reliefs of the throne-bearing goddess of Kemet. In the writings of Plutarch, Deicide et Osiris, 2nd century CE, her divinity was interpreted through Greek philosophy. Plutarch called her the female principle of nature, the intelligence that governs the world. Yet his words were not translation, they were interpretation, filtered through the mind of another civilization. The sacred had been given a new language, and with language, a new meaning. But in the halls of Dendera, the truth remained. There, beneath the fading paint of the hypostyle hall, the original name survives, Aset, not Isis, not queen of magic, but she of the throne. Archaeologists like E.A. Wallace Budge, R.O. Faulkner, and E.A. Raymond recorded it with precision. Their translations confirm it. The shift from Aset to Isis occurred not by faith, but by phonetic substitution. The Greek tongue had no sound for the Egyptian set, so they softened it. Aset became Ilis, later Isis, a name reformed by convenience, not by reverence. But in Kemet, names were not spoken for convenience. To the priests of the Old Kingdom, every sound was sacred, every syllable a vibration. They believed that the language of the gods was not metaphor, it was physics. Words built the world, and to rename a god was to shift the axis of creation itself. At Abydos, her image stands beside that of Osiris. But in the original inscriptions, she is not described merely as his wife. She is the seat upon which he reigns, the embodiment of sovereignty itself. Without Aset, there is no throne. Without the throne, there is no king. In the Greek retelling, that truth was simplified. The eternal was made human. The force of creation reduced to the tenderness of motherhood. It was not blasphemy. It was adaptation. A reshaping of the divine to fit the human form. And yet, in that translation, something broke. The vibration that carried her essence was silenced. The power of the name was lost in the echo of empire. Egyptologist D.A. Raymond once wrote, "In the utterance of divine names, the Egyptian did not see speech, but invocation, a summoning of essence." In other words, to speak Aset was to bring her into being. To call her Isis was to call a memory of her, a reflection, not the source. Every letter in Aset had purpose: the reed, the folded cloth, the loaf, each symbol a note in a cosmic chord. A name not meant to be translated, but to be felt. This was the language of the divine, a system built not on phonetics, but on resonance. Every glyph a sound, every sound a frequency, every frequency a gate. The priests of Heliopolis believed that creation began with a word, the utterance of who. And in that sound, reality unfolded. So when the Greeks renamed the gods of Egypt, they did not only rename them, they rewrote the sound of creation itself. The temples of Philae became museums, the priests were replaced by interpreters, and the ancient tongue was buried under 1,000 years of silence. By the time the last hieroglyph was carved, the true sound of Aset had already vanished from memory. Yet the stone remains. At Dendera, her throne still glows faintly beneath the carvings of the zodiac ceiling. At Philae, her sanctuary still aligns with the rising sun. And at Abydos, her name is still visible, untouched, untranslated, eternal. If you listen closely to the Nile when the wind is still, you can almost hear it. The breath of the ancient tongue rising and falling like the tide. Not a word, but a pulse, a memory trying to return. The world remembers Isis, but Egypt remembers Aset. And if this truth has already changed how you see that name, stay. The oldest name in history is about to speak again. Subscribe, not for stories, but for memory. When the conquerors arrived, they did not burn the temples. They translated them, and in that translation, the gods changed shape. 332 BCE, the horizon of Kemet turns pale under the march of a foreign army. Alexander of Macedon crosses the desert, not as a destroyer, but as a redeemer. The priests of Memphis crown him Pharaoh, believing the favor of the gods has returned. Yet beneath that ceremony, the old language begins to die. When Alexander's empire fractures, the Ptolemies inherit the Nile, Greek rulers in Egyptian crowns. They speak of reverence, of unity between worlds, but their unification is linguistic. Hieroglyphs are carved beside Greek letters. Papyrus scrolls rewritten in new alphabets. The divine sound of the Nile replaced by the tongue of the Aegean. Aset becomes Isis, Asar becomes Osiris, Heru becomes Horus, Jehuti becomes Thoth. Each name softened, reshaped to fit the syllables of a new world. Temples like Philae and Esna, once pure in script, become bilingual monuments. On one wall, the ancient Medunetja, the words of the gods. On the other, Greek dedications to Isis Panthea, the all-goddess. To the foreign eye, this was reverence. To the keepers of Kemet, it was the beginning of silence. The priests were commanded to use Greek alongside Demotic. They obeyed, not in defiance, but in survival. And thus the gods began to fade, not by sword, but by translation. Kemet, the Black Land, became Aegyptos. The sound of fertile soil turned to echoing marble. The sacred word Ngr, divine essence, became Theos. And in that conversion, a truth was lost. The Egyptians had no word for God in the Western sense. To them, Enchar meant force, principle, vibration of being. It was not someone you worshipped, it was something you aligned with. Aset became Isis, Mat became justice, Heka became magic. Translation was not understanding, It was empire. The Greek world loved beauty, order, and definition. The Egyptian world thrived on mystery, symbol, and paradox. And when those two met, meaning was simplified, polished until only the reflection remained. The infinite made literal, the sacred made story. Yet beneath the shadow of empire, the myths of Kemet endured, whispered in sanctuaries, hidden in stone. Among them, the oldest and most complete, the resurrection of Osiris by Aset. The pyramid texts, utterance 364 through 366, speak of it in fragments. They tell of the god Osiris, betrayed and dismembered by his brother Set, his body scattered across the land, his spirit divided, and of Aset, not as widow, but as restorer, the one who gathered the fragments, who breathed life back into death, who conceived Haru, the avenger, through the power of memory and will. In the marshes of the Nile, she hid the air of heaven. Her enemies searched the reeds, but the goddess of the throne had no equal in cunning. That image endures, Aset, wings outstretched over her sleeping child, a mother, yes, but more, the embodiment of sovereignty, protecting the future of divine order. Even as Greek poets reimagined her as Isis of 10,000 names, the original myth remained, the woman who outwitted chaos itself. But her power was not only maternal, it was intellectual. And the priests who preserved her story guarded one truth above all, the secret of the name. In the Turin Papyrus, 1993, a myth unfolds that reveals the depth of Aset's wisdom, the tale of Isis and his secret name. The sun god Ra had aged, his saliva dripped to the earth. Aset, seeking to know the source of divine power, shaped that droplet into a serpent. When the serpent struck Ra, the god was paralyzed by its venom. Aset came to him, not as enemy, but as healer. She offered to draw out the poison, but only if he revealed his true name. Ra resisted. He recited his titles, his victories, his lineage, but the poison climbed higher. When he could bear it no more, he whispered the word none had ever heard, and Aset received it. She did not repeat it, she held it within. And in that moment, she became mistress of all magic. She did not seek power, she sought understanding. And in the breath of a dying god, she found it. The ancients believed that to know the true name of a being was to know its essence. A name was not a label. It was a map of energy. To speak it was to summon it. To conceal it was to protect it. Thus, when the Greeks renamed the gods, they did not simply rename them. They severed the thread that connected sound to source. In the centuries that followed, the name Isis spread across empires. Her image appeared in Rome, in Hispania, in the far reaches of Britannia. But her language, her sound, was no longer of the Nile. It had become Latin, adopted by new rituals, new prayers, new meanings. Her temples survived, but her essence was translated out of existence. What if every translation you've ever read, from myth to scripture, was built to protect you from the power of the original name? Because Aset was never just a goddess, she was an equation, a throne, a frequency, a memory of creation itself, and every time her name was softened, humanity stepped one note further away from the sound that once connected it to the divine. What was lost was not merely history, it was resonance, it was alignment. The name of power, forgotten beneath centuries of linguistic mercy, but the glyphs remain. The sound that once opened worlds still waits, unspoken. And the question endures, not in books, but in silence. If the true name of Aset were spoken again, what would awaken? In 1822, the stone spoke. And for the first time since Cleopatra's fall, the goddess whispered her name again, Aset. 1799, near the small Nile Delta town of Rosetta, a black basalt stone is unearthed by French soldiers. A decree written in 3 languages, Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic, the Rosetta Stone. No one yet realizes it will resurrect an entire civilization's voice. For nearly 2,000 years, the script of Kemet had been silent. Its language, the tongue of Aset, Arsal, Mat, forgotten beneath centuries of conquest. Scholars called the symbols mystic pictures, unaware they were the alphabet of the divine. Then came Jean-Francois Champollion, a linguist, obsessed since childhood with the secrets of Egypt. For 20 years he studied Greek, Coptic, Hebrew, Arabic, searching for the bridge. And in 1822, he found it. By comparing the cartouches, those sacred opals encircling royal names, he decoded the word Ptolemaios. From that name, the system unfolded. The sounds returned. The silence broke. Through the voice of a stone, Aset spoke again. The name long called Isis in Greek temples was revealed in the hieroglyphs. Aset, not Isis, but Aset. Not an echo of empire, but the breath of Kemet. This moment, a mere flash in academic history, was more than linguistic triumph. It was resurrection. For the first time in centuries, scholars could read the hymns inscribed in her temples. Language is a tomb, and every letter carved by empire is another layer of stone. The Greeks had rendered Aset as Isis to fit their phonetic tongue. The harder lost, the resonance softened. Where Aset carried the sound of the throne, stability, sovereignty, vibration, Isis became melody, beautiful but hollow. The power of tone was stripped of its frequency. In ancient Egyptian belief, sound was not symbol, it was substance. To mispronounce a god's name was to sever your connection to their essence. But fragments of that sound survived, hidden within Coptic, the final descendant of the ancient language. Even when hieroglyphs vanished, Coptic priests whispered, Aset in liturgy, a faint echo of the mother's true vibration. The last living breath of the Nile's divine tongue. When a name is spoken, a soul awakens. When it is forgotten, the world sleeps. Even as the language eroded, her worship endured. The temple of Philae, the last sanctuary of Aset, stood defiant long after the rise of Christianity. In 391 CE, Emperor Theodosius declared all pagan temples closed, but Philae resisted. The priests of Aset continued their rites in secret, the flicker of oil lamps against hieroglyphic walls. Rome fell, empires shifted. Still, her voice was heard upon the water. For 2 more centuries, her name lived, spoken by Nubian kings, carved by worshippers who crossed the desert to honor the Lady of Philae. It was not until 537 CE, under Emperor Justinian, that her sanctuary was finally silenced. The priests were expelled, the sacred island emptied, but the goddess did not die. She migrated. They closed her temples, but they could not silence her name. From Kemet to Britain, women still whispered Isis in prayer. Her cult spread across the ancient world, to Greece, to Rome, to the far edges of Gaul and Britannia. In Pompeii, frescoes depict her in marble white robes, bearing the sistrum. In Rome, the Isium Campens stood near the Pantheon, a temple dedicated to her in the heart of empire. Sailors invoked her name for safe passage. Mothers prayed to her for protection. Scholars, poets, and mystics called her Regina Coeli, Queen of Heaven. Empires fall, fates change, but the mother with her child endures. In the Roman era, her image transformed. Isis lactans, the mother nursing her divine son Horus. Centuries later, the same icon reappeared in Christian churches. The Madonna and Child. The posture identical, the gesture the same. Only the names had changed. To the faithful, it was Mary and Jesus. To the memory of Kemet, it was Aset and Heru. The continuity was undeniable. An unbroken lineage of the Divine Mother, reinterpreted but never erased. In the centuries following the fall of Rome, Aset's presence persisted. In alchemy, in mysticism, in secret orders that venerated her under new names. The word Isis survived in Latin texts, Renaissance manuscripts, even Enlightenment societies, fragments of a goddess too ancient to disappear. And in each iteration, she adapted, cloaking herself in the language of the age. If you've made it this far, you already carry her memory. Like the priests who hid her name in stone. Share this video and let the name Aset be spoken again. Through archaeology, philology, and the patient work of scholars, the goddess once mistranslated into myth began to re-emerge, not as relic, but as revelation. The temples of Philae and Dendera still bear her name. The inscriptions remain untouched by empire. Every glyph, every curve of chisel, proclaims it, and when the world finally learned to read her name again, it did not resurrect the goddess, it resurrected the truth. The story of Isis had always been a Greek one, elegant, romantic, complete. But the story of Aset is older. It is the sound of creation remembering itself. And through the rediscovery of the hieroglyphs, humanity was reminded of a single, profound truth. Names are not just history, they are power, they are memory. They are the language of the divine, written in the breath between worlds. And so, after 2 millennia of translation, conquest, and forgetting, the mother of Kemet rose again, not from myth, but from stone. The dust of centuries covers her temples, but her reflection still moves in the river. Though the granite pillars of Philae lie half buried beneath modern waters, the essence of Aset, the true Isis before the Greeks, endures. She was never erased, only rewritten. Every civilization that followed Egypt, Greek, Roman, Christian, and even modern secular, carried fragments of her within their myths, their art, and their language. In the hearts of those who seek the divine feminine, Aset's story breathes again. Her hieroglyphs, once silenced, are now deciphered. Her language, once buried beneath foreign tongues, hums beneath the surface of ancient chants and prayers. Aset was never merely the goddess of magic or motherhood. She was Kemet's soul itself, the mirror that reflected both divine intellect and human endurance. And when the Greeks renamed her Isis, they thought they were translating her. In truth, they were transforming her, and in doing so, they spread her far beyond the Nile. Every empire rewrites the names of its gods, and every civilization forgets the voice that once called them home. But voices, like rivers, return to their source. The academic speaks of cultural syncretism, the historian records religious adaptation. Yet behind those sterile words lies something profound, the survival of a consciousness, Aset's consciousness all through time itself. Even in silence, she endured, even when her image became the Virgin Mary, nursing Christ, even when her temples were turned to churches, her archetype, the mother, the magician, the protector, lived on. She did not die, she changed form. Names are portals. To speak one is to awaken what sleeps. Across the modern world, linguists, Afrocentric historians, and spiritual seekers dig through millennia of distortion to recover the true names of Kemet's gods: Aset, Asar, Haru, Nebitet. What was once whispered only in the halls of esoteric mystery schools now resurfaces in music, art, and the quiet rebellion of remembrance. Scholars of African antiquity reassert what the Greeks took and rebranded, that these names, these symbols, were not myths of the Mediterranean, but truths born from the Black Land. Kemet. Aset is more than Isis. She is the origin, before the overlay, the first vibration before translation, the unbroken mother of wisdom and will. In modern temples and quiet homes, across continents, her name is being spoken again. Aset, the breath of creation reborn. She is not myth, she's memory. And her throne was never empty, only renamed. And with that rediscovery comes power, not political, not institutional, but ancestral power, the return of identity through language. The sound of Aset carries something the Greek Isis cannot, the echo of a people reclaiming their divine history. To speak her name is to reverse the colonization of the spirit, to unmask the centuries of erasure that renamed gods, lands, and people. The revival of her name is a resurrection, not of religion, but of remembrance. The hieroglyphs, once silent, now hum in classrooms and documentaries, in songs and digital archives. What was once the domain of priests and scholars is now open to the world. Aset's return is not mythic. It is linguistic, historical, spiritual. When you call her Aset, you do not summon a goddess, you awaken a civilization. The revival of Aset's name has become a mirror for modern humanity's search for origin. Each syllable, Aset, recalls the moment before division, before empire, before translation, when truth had only one language. In the temples of Dendera and Philae, her image still stands, chipped, weathered, but undefeated. The Greeks renamed her Isis, the Romans crowned her Regina Coeli. The Christians transformed her into Mary, yet beneath every transformation, the same truth, the divine feminine never vanished. It merely changed its mask. Aset's name now returns as a whisper of rebellion against historical amnesia. It is the refusal to forget that Africa birthed not only humanity, but divinity. She was the first mother, not of Egypt alone, but of memory itself. As we speak the name Aset, something shifts, the centuries collapse. The marble gods of Greece bow to the limestone queens of Kemet. The rediscovery of Aset's true name is not a mere academic correction. It is a spiritual event, a reconnection to the first language of creation. To call her Isis is to echo empire. To call her Aset is to restore the sound of truth. What happens when the old names are spoken again? When memory returns to the tongue that forgot? The answer lies not in history books, but in the heart that remembers its source. The story of Aset is not the story of a goddess. It is the story of how humanity loses and rediscovers its own soul. When the Greeks came, they gave her a new face. When the Romans came, they gave her a new name. When the Christians came, they gave her a new story, and now we give her back her truth. I am only a messenger. The rest is yours to remember.